Welcome to the Single Malt Strategy Podcast. This is episode 40. Welcome, and how are you guys doing?
Well, I'm doing fine.
What the fuck are you guys doing?
I'm playing along.
Oh,
It's like improv.
well, you're going to be hearing a lot from me in the next hour and a half. Thanks for reminding everybody that you guys are here, but this is going to be the historical gamer. You can call me Matt's podcast rant.
I like that.
But anyway, so out of curiosity, have any of you guys looked at Anno 1800?
No.
I have. I mean, I did not play it. I've watched streams of it, and it's very, very just. It's beautiful. It's gorgeous. The textures and the entire world, everything about it looked beautiful. I do like how it's kind of like a mix. It kind of gives you that civilization or like a civilization builder game where you're building the town square and the buildings on the side, and kind of gives you that economy system in there. So I really do like it. I didn't try it because I think the graphics for that would be a little bit too much for a mid-range graphics card. I'm probably gonna try
Wait
it.
a minute. You spent like $1,500 on your computer and it's a mid-range computer?
Mid-range graphics card.
So, just for those of who are unaware, Anno 1800 is a city builder, is kind of my understanding of it. I have not played any of the Anno games.
Oh, really?
There are multiple Anno games. Have you played any of the Anno games in the past, Tortuga?
I have, yeah. I've played some of the past ones. And I've actually followed a few, just casual browsing from some YouTube videos. Yeah, it's you can think of it as like the latest Pharaoh or Caesar. I don't know if you guys played those really old games, City Builders.
I printed out like a 300-page manual for Caesar 3.
Holy shit.
I remember falling absolutely in love with. I had to take Latin in middle school. I had to take 3 years of Latin in my school. And so, like, this was one of the things that while I was taking Latin, I was like, oh man, Caesar 3 is awesome. I suck at Latin, but this is Rome, man. So, but yeah, I never played any of the Anno games. I did play Caesar 3. I played a fair bit of the SimCity games, obviously, and I played a lot of Tropico 1 through 3s. So, I mean, I'm not a stranger to city builders. I know Anno in the past, I think, has focused more on like futuristic games with like Anno 2205, and I think there's one in like 2700.
Yeah, they have, I think, two futuristic titles, but I think they have more past titles. They have, I'm gonna say off the top of my head, 4 past titles.
Okay.
So,
have they ever done the 1800s before?
no.
Okay.
I think they've done 14, 17, 16.
Oh, you're right. I think there was one that was like set in like the Renaissance, I think, and then I think there was a 1700. I think you're right. I vaguely remember seeing like a box on a shelf at like a Target or something like years ago for it.
I'm going to pretend I'm not just looking at Wikipedia right now, and I'm going to just go off the top of my head that they have a 1602, a 1503, a 1701, and a 1404.
Why is it all like odd? Like why not like 1500 and why 1504? Like why not? I wonder why that. There must be some kind of story behind that.
Yeah, that is a good question. I mean, maybe it draws attention to it. I think it kind of does.
I think I'm gonna guess also part of it is like there's these years mean something. Because the newest one which came out is Anno 1800, and it's very specifically geared to be like this is the Industrial Revolution. And if you think about the 1800s, like during the Napoleonic Wars, in the early 1800s, probably right around 1800, the British Empire, London and the British Isles specifically, were really starting to go through the Industrial Revolution. And that was sort of a watershed moment, as the beginning of 1800 is the rise of coal in Europe, and the rest of Europe kind of lags behind. But it's, it seems to be focused on the Industrial Revolution in the 19th century. So I would guess, like, I don't know, but it looks like Anno 1602's subtitle is Creation of a New World, 1503 subtitle The New World. So there might be a historical reason behind that? Maybe?
I'm still just happy that I got 4 games in the past and 2 in the future.
I mean, you're right on that. But I guess
that's the depth of my knowledge, really. I mean, the game is a city builder. I don't know what excites you about Anno 1800, because city builders themselves have just really, really evolved since. Okay, maybe. Yeah, I would say definitely there hasn't been like a revolution in city builder design, but I guess their focus has shifted. That's what I should say. SimCity, you could just build a grid structure, put your commercial, industrial, residential down. Now, Anno's never been that way. They've always been about harvesting minerals and trade and stuff like that, so it's a different focus than SimCity altogether. I'd almost put them in two different city builder categories, like the SimCities, the City Skylines, what was that other one? The one that...
Tropico?
No. There's another city builder that's like SimCity XL. What is it called?
I'm not from Cities XL or something, maybe?
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
That's one. Wait, City Skylines is just the evolution of that, is it? Or the successor? Because Cities XL was supposedly terrible.
I'm not sure. Honestly, I haven't played like any city builders recently other than Tropico.
Yeah, there's those. I would say there's like these city builders, and then there's like these. I don't know how to describe them any differently, but like the Tropicos and the Caesars and Pharaohs. I would put all these into a different thing, where you're managing resources more. With the City Skylines and SimCity, these are like true metropolis constructors, where you're managing not really the resources and all that. You're managing like the flow. It's mostly traffic simulation, because that's what a lot of good city construction comes down to, good public transportation, stuff like that. Look, I'm not an expert on these games. I don't know why I'm speaking as if I am.
I know for Tortuga, for those of you who are unaware, Tortuga has can we say you have a book club going on your Discord? Is that a thing we can say you have, even though like we've covered...
There's a channel on my Discord called Book Club.
You had a couple meetings for it. You had a couple of, people get together and chat via voice about the one book that we've gotten to thus far.
Look, it's still my inspiration for reading Massey's Dreadnought, and...
Have you finished that yet, by the way?
I have like 3 more chapters, and the book club will resume when we all start Kaigun together. It should be in a couple more weeks.
I mean, that's definitely the goal. That's a book I've been working on for 6 months as part of the book club or whatever. But reading about that era of history, for whatever reason, the late, sort of the Victorian era, I guess I would say, is really interesting to me for a lot of reasons. And Anno, if you look at the look and feel of it, feels a little bit Victoria-like. I think if you look at the screenshots and if you look at the marketing.
Really?
And to me, I mean, it's just, again, it's an aesthetic thing. I wouldn't say I haven't played the game. But then also reading about Massey's Dreadnought and looking at 3 Moves Ahead covering it, Rob Zachney of 3 Moves Ahead, his tag that he attached to the tweet he put out about this game was, "Let me tell you about the miracle of coal." And I think the era of industrialization is really interesting to me. And I haven't seen a lot of city builders tackle it, right? Like Tropico tackles it sort of indirectly. You're this sleepy Caribbean island and you kind of build up, but it's all like 1950s or modern era. There's a little, like the newer ones have a slightly different setup, but SimCity, it's all about the modern city builder. I haven't really seen a lot of games tackle the Industrial Revolution, and the Industrial Revolution is fascinating for a lot of reasons. Rapid technological change in a short period of time, what that impact is on the city, and I think based on what I've seen with Anno, is your city does evolve over time, right? Like, your city at the very beginning of the game becomes something very different as the Industrial Revolution moves on and, becomes much more late Victorian. And for whatever reason, the Victorian era has always just kind of really interested me. I've participated, this is going back to when I was in high school, in a forum-based game that was run by a captain in the U.S. Army where, like, he's the administrator and he evaluates all the orders. But basically, it took place from like 1900 to the outbreak of World War I, and everybody played as a different country. And you had to do things like try and build up your country's economy, see which, commercial projects made sense to invest in while also building up your military. And, countries like the Ottoman Empire, you're struggling to hold yourself together. And, this guy is borderline professional historian. And I've been playing a lot more. They actually restarted this game recently, along with an actual historian of the period as well as helping administer it, and playing as the Ottoman Empire and really struggling with Bulgaria. But it's just a really interesting period in time to me. And I think, if you if this era interests you, Anno certainly looks appealing. But I think the one thing that's kind of held me back is I only have 2 game clients on my computer. I have GOG, which I barely ever use, but I have used a little bit for the close combat remakes, and Steam, which is the catalog I use for pretty much all of my games.
Mm-hmm.
Anno 1800 was originally supposed to be on Steam. Like, it was wishlisted on Steam, all those other things, before I even knew it existed. And then, shortly before it released, they pulled it from the Steam wishlisting ability, and they released it. I don't know if it's an exclusive. I'm assuming it's available on Ubisoft's store as well, but it's not on Steam, and it's available on the Epic Games Store. So I think that's kind of interesting, because this is the first, for those of you unfamiliar, Epic, the developer of Fortnite, released a game store as a direct competitor to Steam. Was this last year or earlier this year? Somewhat recent. Where basically they're trying to say Steam, the makeup of Steam is that the developer gets 70% of every purchase. So if I buy a $10 game on Steam, the developer gets $7. Steam gets to keep $3 of that. And Epic has basically said, that's kind of a ripoff, right? Like, small developers are getting killed. You might only sell a few copies of your game. If you're losing 30% of your income to the Steam store just for the goodness out of Steam's heart to be on the Steam Game Store, why would you release your game there? Come over here, and we'll only charge $1 to the developer, and $9 goes to the developer, $1 goes to Epic. So it's a 90-10 split rather than a 70-30 split.
But do you think that will change in the future? Like, for example, like Steam is pretty much the nexus of all like gaming for PC. Do you feel like if all the developers kind of concentrate toward Epic, do you feel like they might change that?
Maybe a little. I don't know what Steam's financials are. They're not a public company, so it's kind of hard to dive into like how much it really costs them to run things. I think if you look at people like Johan from, was it Johan or was it Frederick from Paradox, who was basically saying like what Steam provides, he basically said like, there is no reason that a game platform or a game store like Steam should ask 30%. He's basically saying, obviously he works for a developer, right? So he's got a vested interest in paying less to the client because that means more money for his company. But I think it was Frederick Wester. And he was basically saying like, listen, the only thing that Steam provides is a catalog of games, and they provide the mechanism to complete the sale. Why would you give someone 30% of your money for that? And, a lot of people were freaking out. They were like, hey, does this mean Paradox is going to go to the Epic Game Store? Because the Epic Game Store has become a bit controversial. They have poached quite a few titles in exclusive deals that have not released on Steam at all, and they're releasing on Epic. And there have been a lot of gamers out there who have been really upset about this. And I think part of it is the fact that people just enjoy the convenience of Steam, the fact that all their games are in one place, the fact that, if a real competitor did arise to Steam at some point, like, let's just hypothetically say 5 years from now, Epic was killing Steam and Steam went out of business, and you lost all 300 or 400 games that are in your library, like, I think gamers are a little bit sensitive to that because no one owns their games anymore, right? They're all digital. So what happens if a company like Steam faces serious competition? I think people maybe have a little bit of a moment where they freak out and they say, well, wait a minute here. Like, Steam has to be the only game in town because I'm invested in Steam. But I don't know. I think it's kind of interesting because with all these exclusive titles, most of them have been kind of platformers. Most of them have been adventure games. They haven't been games that I've been terribly interested in. But Anno 1800 is probably the first one that's actually convinced me enough. I have not yet bought it yet, but it's convinced me enough to download the Epic Game Store to my computer at least. And I'm considering making a purchase, although there's sort of a question of if your information is safe in the Epic Game Store also, because almost 50% of Epic is owned by Tencent, which is a Chinese company, which apparently there's some accusations out there that Epic has sold user information to the government of China. I don't know if that's true or not. It's also worth pointing out that Tencent owns like a 10 or 20% share in Paradox too. So, for whatever that's worth, I don't think that means anything. I think that's probably a little bit of fear mongering out there by people who are trying to convince you not to download the Epic Game Store. But I don't know. I guess it's possible.
Well, competition is a good thing. So, in this sense, the same way we were talking about how it'd be nice to have, I mean, in anything you really enjoy, if there's more people creating it, then the creators have to give a better product in order to make themselves stand out. It's also always been true of Steam, although the drawback is that you don't really want to install 40 different launchers for your different games, which is probably where Steam has cornered the market. Like, I only want one place where I have to, like, okay, let's say we're playing this game, we play it on Steam, and then my friend says, okay, well, let's go play multiplayer Anno 1800, and we have to close Steam, we have to open the Epic browser, or maybe we don't even have to do that, but I also still don't, I have some naive fear that having like 10 launchers running might be taxing to system resources. Maybe they don't play nicely together. There's maybe this unfounded fear that somehow they won't. I just want all my games in one place is probably a short way of the old man on the porch yelling at kids to get off his lawn. That's kind of like what I'm doing here. I want all my games in one place, even though I say, yes, competition's good. Also, 30% for a game, yeah, I think they're overcharging for just being a purchasing vehicle. Yeah.
Well, I think some of that dates back to the fact that like 4 or 5 years ago, Steam used to be really exclusive about games they let on their platform. The catalog was relatively small, and if you were an indie, you had to like appeal to Steam to say like, can you please let my game on your store? Steam reviewed and decided whether they approved it or not. And I think back then, indie games used to get onto Steam, and they were instantly a success. They may not be like a multi-million-dollar life-changing success, but you didn't really have to worry about recoup. And I'm sure I'm exaggerating. I'm sure there were exceptions. But the stories you heard coming out of Steam was like almost like it was like the Steam miracle. If you got your game on Steam, if you managed to get it there, you would be successful. And then Greenlight happened, and then they basically just dropped all pretense and said, basically, everybody wants to be on Steam, you just pay us like $100 and then you're going to be on Steam, or whatever it is. So now there's this sense of just absolute mounds of games on Steam. And yes, Steam is convenient, but I don't think, there certainly is not the sense of, if you get on Steam, you will be successful. In fact, you see a lot of developers out there basically struggling mightily. I know I bring these guys up a lot, but 3 Moves Ahead had an indie developer on. I think it was 3 Moves Ahead. It might have been PC, like a true PC gaming podcast I listened to, but it was basically an indie developer that had released a really successful title on Steam in like 2014. And he took like 2 or 3 years off from developing games, came back, made a new game in 2019, or sorry, it was 2017 or 2018. And he was talking to other indies out there, and he was stunned about how much the market had changed in just 2 or 3 years. And how in the 2013, 2014, 2015 period of time, indie developers were just riding high. Self-publishing was a thing you could do. You would be successful. All you had to do was get on Steam and everything would be great. And then all of a sudden, after Greenlight, after everything opened up in Steam, that narrative changed, and now developers are just getting slaughtered. Indie developers are just getting slaughtered. You release a game on Steam, it's on the front page for 2 hours, and then it's gone. And then no one will ever find your game again.
Are you agreeing that 30% is overcharging then, or were you saying that?
What I'm trying to say is that at one point in time, I think the 30% could have been justified by Steam to say, you are getting onto an exclusive platform with a large user base, and if we accept you, you will be getting a huge benefit just by being on our store. So us charging you 30% is totally fair, because we are essentially ensuring that you will get a large audience that will see your game. Getting onto Steam is getting exposure, and that's why you're paying the 30%. And then I think as Steam's practices have changed, and it is no longer a curated market, and the quality of games has dipped, and the availability of discoverability has just vanished, now it's like, I'm paying $30, I'm paying 30% to get into a giant search engine, and hopefully someone will find my game? What exactly is it I'm paying for? At least in the past, theoretically, Steam could argue you're getting exposure, or you're getting a market that's going to see your product, right? They were basically acting like a default publisher, where they said, listen, we're going to get your game in front of millions of people. Now what does Steam say? 30% because, haha, fuck you?
But do you feel like this is because 30% is pretty much like what every app store and every market is pretty much doing. Like it's been going on for like this since the 2000s. Like Apple started with 30% off their app store, Google followed with 30% off their app store. Do you feel like that needs to change to a more, I would say, like what Epic's doing, like 90/10?
I mean, I'm not going to say what Apple or Google should do. I think the difference is Apple operates in a closed ecosystem, and so they can kind of charge what they will. Steam operates in an open platform, which I think I think the Epic Game Store is actually a brilliant example of why an open system is a good thing, and why the Apple model is flawed from my point of view from a competitive landscape, because there is no competition to the App Store. So Apple can charge 30%, and is it fair? Probably not, because Apple has the same problem. Developers release their app and it vanishes into nothingness.
I disagree, though. Apple's competitor is basically that you don't have to buy an iPhone. Now, maybe that's basically like saying, look, Steam's competitor is you don't have to buy a PC. But you're trying to say, okay, but I mean, to be fair, I guess your point is
that's
that...
more of an OS argument, though, because the counter argument to Steam is, oh, well, you don't have to buy Windows. You could buy what, like that would, I don't know, I don't think they're the same argument, because Apple, yes, you're right, you could buy a different phone. That is 100% true. But once you have the device, once you have the operating system, the only place you can go to buy things is through the Apple Store. And if you try to...
And they're kind of linked, though, right? Like, if you buy an iPhone, you're not buying it to make calls. Any phone can make calls. You're buying it for the apps, right?
I mean, I don't, honestly, the OS is probably more what you're buying for. I mean, personally, I don't download a lot of apps.
I know when I was working for Apple and Microsoft, I know, and I was talking, I got a chance to talk to a lot of developers, hundreds of developers, and I noticed that when I did talk to them, that a lot of them coded more toward Apple than like the competing platform like Google, and I was kind of like stunned because I was at the time, I think Apple had like a billion iPhones and Google had 2 billion Android devices. And I was kind of stunned. I'm like, wouldn't you kind of focus more of your development time toward Android because it has 2 billion Android phones out there and Apple has 1 billion? And they said there's a couple of things that make it different. They notice people on the Android side. One developer was saying that they get little to no revenue from the Google side for their Google app or their Google game. And on the Apple side, that people actually did buy their game on the Apple side and actually continue buying in-app purchasing, so they get majority of their revenue. One developer actually claimed that they make an accessory. I forgot the name of the developer, but they make an accessory that's in Best Buy. And basically, they spend. He told me they spend 29 to 30 days developing for iOS, and then the other 1 day out of the month on Android. And I was kind of surprised by that. I've been noticing that a lot of developers that there are more apps on the Apple Marketplace and on the App Store, and they're more refined. So like they have more updates, they have more features than their Google counterpart.
Yeah, I think that makes sense, though, because basically if you think about the people who are owning an iPhone, you probably have a lot more people with disposable income. If you're buying an iPhone, it's an expensive iPhone to begin with, much more expensive than the competitor products. So you're obviously you're basically showing a flag right away that you're willing to spend more money on a product which is basically the same as the competitors.
I mean, that's a generalization, though, too. The Samsung Galaxy phones aren't any less expensive than the iPhone, and the same would go for a lot of the Google Pixel devices. In terms of the actual OEM cost that you pay to the OEM, the difference is that Android also has a huge number of devices that are much cheaper, so you have a much more diversified OS. But, I mean...
are you saying, do you think it's not true, though, that iPhone users generally have a higher disposable income than Android users? Or I should put it this way, regardless of their disposable income, I have this image of somebody who doesn't really know about buying an iPhone, because that's kind of what you do. If you don't have any idea, you look around, some people have some iPhones, Apple has this good marketing campaign, and they kind of have become ubiquitous as like the cell phone provider. It's like the image you think of when you think of a cell phone, for better or worse. And now, so you take that, a person who doesn't really know anything, they buy this and then they go onto an app and they're like, okay, I spent money on this, I'm going to spend money on the apps. Or they have kids who don't really know about their phones and then they go onto it, and there's been some fallout from that with.
So are you saying Apple users are less informed?
I do think that you could probably make that generalization, but regardless of whether that's the case, I think that Apple users are more likely to spend money on apps.
I was being snide about the less informed. I think there's a stereotype within certain elitist Android users who would make that argument, but I don't know if it's borne out or not. I work for a cell phone company, and I would say the majority of our office probably has Apple devices, but it's not a huge discrepancy between one or the other. But I think if you look at the actual numbers, you're absolutely right. The average amount of money that someone who has an Apple device will spend on apps or other services on their phone is definitely greater, or at least historically has been. I might be 2 or 3 years out of date. I had a couple of projects at work where I worked on some app development, and I looked at the data at the time, and as of 2 or 3 years ago anyway, Apple users spent something like 2 to 3 times as much on apps as Google users.
Yeah, so that's all I was trying to say is I think that people are developing more for Apple. I know this is not even what we're supposed to be talking about, right? We're kind of on a tangent here, but...
No, so I mean, like, my point was not that, like, I wasn't trying to make an argument about the Apple Store or Apple not being competitive versus Google. What I was trying to say was that Apple operates largely in a closed ecosystem in that if you buy the device and you want to download an app, the only game in town is the Apple Store.
Yeah.
Google's a little bit less strict on that. They still try and enforce the Google Play Store, but there's ways around it, and it's easier to download third-party apps. Heck, you even have Amazon, who has this like whole ecosystem of their own app store that you can download and purchase. But I think what I was trying to say is that Apple's a good example of a closed ecosystem, where you have one OS, you have one store, and that's where you have to buy everything. So the 30% rev share there, I mean, okay, but like, as a developer, what are you going to do? If you're developing for iOS, you don't really have a choice. If you're developing for Android, in theory, you have a choice, but you're pretty much locked into the Google Play Store as well. If you're developing on Windows PC, however, that's always operated in an open system, right? Like, it wasn't even until, maybe 10 years ago that Steam actually became popular, that downloading through the Steam client was popular. You used to buy every game individually, and it had its own launcher. You know, Tortuga, I know you're talking about how you want one launcher for everything. Every game used to be its own launcher, right? Like,
one launcher to rule them all.
Oh, I'm okay with that too. I mean, basically, if they're not wrapped in a package, it's fine. I prefer that, in fact, because that means the only thing I worry about when it comes to whether it's wrapped in a package, in this case with Steam or not, how is multiplayer going to function? Because I have plenty of games where it's a pain in the butt to get multiplayer to work. To take an example from something we talked about in the last podcast, the only reason I was even looking into getting IL-2 Battle of Stalingrad is because IL-2 1946, which is an amazing game I played a ton of, I can no longer get even like their multiplayer solution to work. And Steam, I generally feel like when you play a game on Steam, it's easier to get the multiplayer to work. So especially if you can connect a lot of the newer games, almost all of them include the functionality to join Steam games from your Steam list. And I'm sure that Steam, this is where they probably have invested some resources. They're spending some of this 30% at least on trying to make a better product. But as far as closed ecosystem goes, we have the same situation within each of these launchers, right? Isn't that one of the biggest things about Epic Games is people complain about them when they buy out a game, right? And they say this is going to be exclusive to us. They're basically putting this closed ecosystem, they're enforcing it on the PC, that if you want to play this game, you have to use their launcher.
Yeah, I think that's reminiscent of the console gaming world, right? Like, it's basically saying, oh, this is an Xbox exclusive, or it's a PlayStation exclusive, or whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the same sort of mentality, but I think it's interesting because I've never once, until Anno 1800, I had no interest in downloading the Epic Game Store, and I'd kind of been following some of the divisive discussions between hardcore Steam users and other folks kind of arguing over Epic and why you should never go to Epic, and it's kind of amusing to watch, and it's almost like a console war all over again, except it seems like there's a lot more people arguing for Steam than there is anyone arguing for Epic. But then Anno 1800, I start hearing some really interesting things about it. I start looking into it, and all of a sudden, like, yeah, I'm probably going to buy that game as soon as this podcast is over. And it's the first time I'm going to download the Epic Game Store. And I think having competition is a good thing, but I also wonder, like, is part of there's been a largely visceral reaction against the Epic Game Store, and is part of that because people feel invested in Steam? Obviously it's not going to happen anytime soon. I can only imagine they're printing money, taking 30% of every game sale. But what happens if Steam fails, right? Like, how many other games, in theory, like a developer could release the executable so that you could download it yourself. Some developers like Matrix have their own executables that you can download directly to the game, and like if you have a Steam copy, you can still get like a non-Steam copy. But how many developers out there don't? And if Steam failed, how many people would lose every game they ever purchased because they've only ever bought games on Steam? And I wonder if part of that is the reaction to the Epic Game Store, is people freaking out that, oh my god, there's competition now. What does this mean for me? Or is it all just a convenience argument? I don't know.
Do you feel like the answer to like the future and the fix to all this? One idea that I was thinking is apps, kind of like a game launcher, a game store for each kind of, I would say, kind of game that you want to play. So, for example, like EA has their own store, and it's filled with Battlefield, and I downloaded that launcher because I own Battlefield 1. And then having another game launcher, game store for, like, let's say strategy games, for like grand strategy games, and just having an entire launcher devoted to that and a game store devoted to that. So kind of splitting up Steam into its own sections, maybe having an entire game store for indie games, just primarily indie games, where it's no big titles there, but just, those, one-man studio development houses where they're like, hey, I just came out with this new platformer. You can download it. It's $2.99 and it's yours, DLC free. You just have to download it from this game store. Do you think that would be kind of like the answer, where everybody, like each genre of gaming has their own store
within Steam, or
outside of Steam? Like, EA being kind of like,
who's gonna run that? Like, who is going to run the Strategy Gamer game launcher store?
The historical gamer.
I mean, so why is Paradox going to agree to allow me to sell their games? Why is Matrix going to allow me to sell their game? Like, I don't know. I don't think that's realistic, because at least Steam, in theory, what does Steam bring to the table, right? Like, if you're a developer and you want to sell your game, what does Steam bring to the table? Primarily, they bring, like 150 million users? Like, they bring access. Everybody who already has their client. But I don't know what anybody else brings. Like, Epic brings the benefit for developers. So Epic says, okay, if you're tired of Steam taking too much money from you, you can come to us, and we will give you a better deal. And so that's the thing. Steam brings the massive user base. EA brings some exclusive content, because whether you like it or not, EA Origin is a game store, and it does bring exclusive EA content. But they're a large publisher, right? So they have access to a huge amount of IP that they can build the foundation of their game store on. Ubisoft, in theory, could try that. They have tried that in the past, but I think they've recognized their own individual game store as kind of not panned out, and they don't have a strong enough catalog of games just under Ubisoft. So they sell their games in most other stores as well, but they have their own game store on the side. Good Old Games has their own game launcher as well, but they focus more on sort of old classic games. They do have modern games on there, but sort of their niche is saying, like, we remake old games that you want to play on your new systems. And so, and by the way, now we have a launcher, so you don't have to download each game individually. But I don't know if genres work, because there is no strategy gaming company out there, and I don't know if there's a market for there to be one. Theoretically, maybe Paradox has their own store someday. I guess maybe that would work. I think they do sell some of their games directly, but why would they let Matrix games on, right? Like, why would they allow Field of Glory Empires to compete with Imperator? Like, what's in it for them? I don't know. I don't think that's terribly likely.
The reason why I'm thinking, because, like, me personally, if there was like Steam is a mix of everything. You got like AAA titles, you have AA titles, you have like the Paradox games, and you also have that it mixed with like not Battlefield, but like Call of Duty, and you have like so you have them all mixed in this one big mess, this one big playpen. Me personally, I wouldn't mind having an additional game launcher or a game store where it's just indies, where it's just focusing on the newest indie game this week, and it's by Matthew, the historical gamer, where he made his first game, and it's a strategy game about naval tactics in World War II. I would love to do that because I think that's
I
that.
thought you were about to give away my secret game. That's going to be the greatest game ever.
No, I wouldn't do that. I'm looking forward to come out, so that's why I'm keeping it hush hush. I'll be your first, what do you call it, early access subscriber.
I mean, like, I hear what you're saying. I just don't know if there's got to be a market, and there's got to be a company that's convincing enough to allow strategy games to all coalesce in one banner. Like, I think there might actually be some stores out there that focus on indie games. In fact, I know there are. But they just don't have a mass market appeal because most people don't necessarily want to download a client just to play through indie games. Like, I can find everything I want on Steam, so why do I download anything else? The only reason I've downloaded Epic is because there's this really interesting game that I want to play. But I wouldn't download a strategy game platform if it wasn't something that had a game that I really wanted to play on it. So I don't think that's super realistic. But what I do think is interesting is to sort of see, like, so Steam has their own gaming store, right? Epic is releasing a competing gaming store that's kind of trying to be, at least appear to be more pro-developer. But there's also all these other things that are going on right now in gaming as well from a gaming platform perspective that I think are really interesting, but also potentially concerning to some extent. So, like, we've got Epic and Steam going at it. We've got EA kind of on their own. But then we've also got companies like Microsoft, which has their own gaming store. They have their own Microsoft storefront like iOS has on their iOS devices that no one ever buys any games from. But they also are releasing a sort of online subscription service. They're basically saying, like, hey, we want to be the Netflix of game, right? Like, you come and you pay a subscription to us, and we'll allow you to have access to all these games. And it gets around the whole, like, I've got all my games purchased through Steam, and I've spent like $2,000 on them over 10 years, and now, I'm tied to Steam forever. Which is the same thing as, like, if I've got a bunch of iOS apps, and I bought like $200 worth of apps over 5 years, I'm probably going to be less likely to switch to Android just because I kind of feel invested there. But then, so Microsoft's taken it a different direction, and they're saying, we're going to sell you a service, which I think is like $10 a month, or maybe it's $15 a month, where you get access to 100 plus games. I think it's $15 a month if you want to play the games on your computer and your Xbox, which is the console games, or it's like $5 a month if you just want to play the PC games, or $9 a month if you just want to play the Xbox games. But basically, they've released the the subscription service where you download or where you pay them a monthly service fee and you get access to games that are in their catalog. And I think there's only like 100 of them. But it's interesting because Imperator is in there as well. And so you buy these games through you buy the service through Microsoft, and it acts like Netflix. And games come and go. So they enter the service and then they leave the service, and then you lose access to the game and you pay a fee for it. But while it's in there, you have unlimited access to the game. And so it's very much like Netflix. And then you have a similar service that EA is trying to offer where they're basically saying, like, hey, through Origin, if you pay us a monthly subscription fee, you get access to all the EA titles through the Origin store for $10 or whatever it is a month. So you've got Epic and Steam going at it from like Steam's basically saying, hey, we really encourage the race to the bottom in pricing and, sales are everything. I haven't quite seen the same thing from Epic. They've been going more on the exclusive route to say, like, you have to come here to get certain games. You pay whatever the price is. And then you've got, Microsoft trying to get into the game saying, like, screw all that noise. Just give us a monthly fee and you can play whatever we have. Whatever you want. You don't have to buy the games. You just give us a monthly fee and you have access to everything. And so it's a really interesting dynamic in the gaming industry right now to see these different companies approach these games in different ways. And I don't mean to be monopolizing the podcast. I mean, I probably have been talking like 75% of the time here. But I think it's a fascinating time. I don't necessarily, I'm kind of concerned, honestly, about some of these elements. Like, I don't think streaming gaming, or not streaming, but I don't think subscription gaming is good for the industry. But I'm not convinced Steam alone, without any serious competitors, is good for the industry either. So, yeah, I don't want to, I guess I should let someone else talk.
85%, I'd say. I don't know. I mean, if we're not talking, it's because we're in awe of what you're saying.
I mean, I am just the greatest ever. But I need to go get some more scotch we can talk about later. So I will let you guys talk for at least the next minute.
So what do you think the answer is, Eric? What would you like to see the industry go?
I mean, it's kind of already been said. Basically, there's the developer friendly route, and then there's Steam, which, you know, I would say the competition's good, and that's why Epic Store is good. The Epic Games Store itself is not one that I'm like, I haven't been ecstatic about it. I think part of the reason comes, I don't know if historical, I don't think he mentioned this, Matthew mentioned this, but Fortnite, just the whole hype surrounding that completely turned me off. And the fact that this Epic Games Store is coming from that developer, I mean, coming from this, or not, is it the publisher? I don't even know. Is Epic Games the publisher, developer? But anyway, whatever their association with Fortnite is, any association with Fortnite is a bad thing. So I just kind of view them as like, they might be trying to target a more immature audience. Or I just thought that Fortnite had the potential to be a very good game. If it was originally, I think, co-op, it's like part builder, Minecraft, defense, kind of fun tower defense, something like that. But the way they went with it, with this, just didn't appeal to me. And the people who play Fortnite are usually, I have this generalized image of immature people, whatever. So
Kids.
Really, really showing my immaturity here myself.
Another news, old man yells at cloud.
Exactly. This is kind of Tortuga again showing how stupid my mind is.
One thing I wanted to ask, so we know like Microsoft is doing the Xbox Game Pass and they're expanding it. Now they're doing cross-platform console and PC. Apple is coming out with Apple Arcade, where you're going to pay a monthly subscription fee and you get a lot of games on the iOS, iPad, Mac, and Apple TV platform. I wanted to ask you, if Steam came out with an all-access Netflix kind of way to play the games, the entire Steam library, or at least a significant part of it, would you guys subscribe to that? Like right now, if they had all your favorite games that you don't have in your catalog, and they were going to say, all right, it's going to be $10 a month, would you guys do it?
I mean, first of all, $10 a month, there's no way. I cannot foresee a way Steam would charge only $10 a month for everything. I would say that probably those things won't appeal to me as much as other people, just because, well, okay, look, it's hard for me to answer because a lot of the games I like to play don't even go on Steam. Rule the Waves, Matrix games, I can get them from the store. I don't know. What do you think, Matt?
All right, we're down to 79% of the podcast being me, so I can speak for a few minutes here.
Yeah, and make sure Jean has this interesting way of deflecting everything away. Let's make sure Jean actually asks.
Jean has said like 10 words.
Yeah, come on. No, I want to hear what Jean has to say.
I feel like since we've had you on, Eric /Tortuga/ who knows what you're really called.
Do you know we do that every podcast?
I mean, that's a shtick now, right? I got to do it.
I love that. We should continue doing that every podcast.
It's my bit, and it's not funny, but I'm going to stick to it because I've committed to it. But I feel like since we've started having you on, Eric, Jean has just become, he's basically like our Walter Cronkite. He's like, what do you think about this, Sonny? But
let's pin him down. Let's pin him down. Jean, I want to know, what the heck do you think about this? What's your thoughts on, I want to know a couple things, actually. I want to know what you think about Epic Game Store, because you haven't said anything about that. What do you think about it with respect to Steam? And also, what do you think about the streaming stuff? It's your turn. Not so easy when you have to answer the tough questions, huh? Can't just sit in there and ask them.
Well, I would, starting off...
Before Jean answers, let me jump in and...
Well, I honestly, starting, I guess, with the Epic Game Store, I I kind of go off Matt's point. I am worried about having games across numerous stores and kind of spreading my catalog. But then again, I'm also worried about having all my games in one store because when you told me what happens if something happens to Steam and they shut down, I'm like, holy shit. Most of my games, or pretty much 95% of my games, are on Steam. So that kind of worried me a little bit.
Well, and frankly, just not to interrupt your thought, but I had gotten some games through a service called Voodoo, or not games, some movies through a service called Voodoo years ago, which was like part of, I think, Walmart. Like when you bought Blu-rays for a long time, they provided digital copies as well with the movie that you bought. That service just shut down. You just lost everything that was in there. I mean, it's not crazy that could happen. Yes, it seems like it right now because they're virtually a monopoly, and I think that's what some people are worried about. But like, in a world where you don't own anything anymore because it's all digital, that's a possibility.
I think because I know Voodoo was a Walmart thing, and I know you could have bought the digital copy. I always go with bigger is better because, like, I started buying my digital copies off iTunes because, well, I mean, Apple's not going anywhere, at least for a couple of decades. I mean, they could, iTunes is going to pretty much be around for a long time. So I pretty much have all my movies through them. So the way I kind of feel like iTunes and the Apple iTunes store is not going to go anywhere anytime soon. I feel the same thing with Steam
To
now
our corporate overlords, we salute.
But like then I could probably say the same thing about Steam because they're so big. They're probably not going to go anywhere at least for the next decade. I mean, in 2029, Steam's still going to be around unless I can't even imagine even if something horrendous happens, they're still going to be around. Right? There's no way Steam can topple within 10 years.
I wouldn't say no way. BlackBerry was just as big, and they toppled much faster than 10 years.
That's a good point. That's a good point.
10 years is a long time in technology. They're not going anywhere anytime soon, but in 10 years, we're not going to be running the same OSs that we're running now, and who knows what games will still work on the platform anyway.
The one thing that worried me, though, is like you said you were going to buy Anno 1800. I was like, ooh, that's a great idea. And I saw those gameplay videos. I was like, you know what? I might do the same. And then when I went to the product page and it was $59.99, I'm like, okay, they're not doing a summer sale, it looks like. And you mentioned that chances are they're probably not going to do like a sale kind of thing.
I mean, I don't know. I didn't notice a huge emphasis on their product page of like low prices. And I would argue actually that the race to the bottom in pricing is bad for gaming as a whole. You know, when no one is willing to pay anything for games, then everything becomes free to play. And then is that good for gaming as a whole? Is it good for companies like Matrix? Is it good for companies like Paradox? I would argue no. It might be good for the end consumer. But I guess my point was I didn't see a super focus on low prices on their store. So, I mean, maybe I'm sure they'll have sales at some point. But it does feel like they're going more for the exclusive game approach as opposed to the super low priced game approach.
The sale thing, though, it's different anyway. I think that the sale thing is actually genius because it basically sits there and it does like the amazing thing. I'm sure I would love to know the data that they've collected on this. You can kind of find everyone's weak spot for a game. Like, okay, this person wasn't going to, with the premise, of course, being this person is not going to buy this game at full price. So after the people who have already decided they're going to buy it have passed. Now let's just try to find the people who will buy it at 75%. Okay, well, now that has passed. Let's see the people who wouldn't have bought it at any higher, but let's continue. This is lost money. It's not like a digital copy costs anything to make. So they might as well just try to squeeze it down to like selling the game for $1 because that's still $1 more they've made than they were going to make.
That's a good point.
In a vacuum, yes, I agree with you, but I think over an extended period of time, and I think we have seen this with Steam, I think what you do is you set consumer expectations that everything is going to be super cheap at some point in time, and then the number of people purchasing it at list price drops, and at some point what you end up having is you end up continuing to lower the average sale price of your game. Initially, it's brilliant. Initially, it massively increases your potential audience and massively increases revenue. over time, I think you have a diminishing return, and eventually you have an erosion effect on your actual opportunity there. And I think what you see is a little bit of what I know we had recorded an episode on this, Jean, where I kind of ranted and we didn't end up posting it, but it kind of gets back to Microsoft's idea of like, let's have a subscription service where you pay $20 a month or whatever it is for a gaming service and you get access to everything. And I got pretty upset about that because, frankly, in my viewpoint is that you're going to have a similar effect where Steam has retrained computer game customers to think, I'm not going to buy anything at list price. I'm going to wait for it to go on sale. Fine. You know what? If you want to save money, I can't fault you for that, right? Like, in one sense, it's brilliant. It's pro-consumer. It allows consumers to access a wider range of games at a lower price, better for the consumer. In theory, it can be better for the developer if it means way more people buy their games. What I'm worried about is the long-term impact of that. If all of a sudden no one is willing to buy a game at $60, and every game has to sell at an average price of $30, or an average price of $20, you have a race to the bottom where at some point in time that is going to affect quality of the game. And what I worry about in a streaming world is how does that work? So if you spend $20 a month and you get access to the entire Microsoft catalog or Steam catalog, how does that money get divvied up? So Microsoft's going to take their cut. Let's say it's 10%. Where does the other 90% go? So does it matter if I played 5 hours of Imperator, 5 hours of Forza, and 5 hours of something else? Does it divvy up 3 ways that way? How does that work? Because what I really worry about is not the Forzas, not the Microsofts, not the Ubisofts. They're going to be fine. But what I worry about in a Steam world, and this is what I spoke about quite extensively in that podcast that will never be aired because I felt like I was an asshole, was that this will end up being something that small developers will race to. If you have a subscription service where it's $20 a month for this service and you get access to the game, you'll have a rush to this platform from smaller developers to say, we're getting killed on Steam, no one's finding our games, there's only 100 games in this Microsoft store today, I can guarantee a large percentage of people who sign up for the service are going to see my game, they're going to try my game, and I'm going to make a little bit of money off of them because presumably the way this works is when someone plays your game, you get a cut of the revenue. It's probably something similar to Spotify, right? When someone listens to your song, you get a little bit of money. It's not as much as if they buy your song outright, but it is something. The concern I have is that if you do this and you set the expectation that gamers everywhere are no longer willing to buy games because that's just not what we do. We watch everything through Netflix. We listen to everything through Spotify, through Apple Music. No one buys anything anymore. Okay, fine. But the problem is when then that marketplace becomes 1,000 games instead of 100, and you have the same problem that indie developers are having on Steam where no one finds anyone's games, and now no one buys anyone's games. In the past, all I needed to do was convince 100 people to buy my game. I made a couple $1,000. I could justify making my game. In the future, when everything's free and everybody's streaming everything, all of a sudden, now I have to have 100,000 people play my game for at least 5 hours to make the same amount of money as I made when 1,000 people bought my game. I'm kind of making up some of the numbers here, but if you look at Spotify, it's a really good example of how this system has manifested itself, where you can make the argument you're on Spotify, you have great discoverability, a lot of people listen to your song, or whatever. I've got a couple of music artist friends who basically are like, yeah, I get like 300,000 listens on a song of mine, and I make shit. You know, I'd be better off making YouTube videos at the rates that I'm getting paid on Spotify, because they're making like 0.2 cents per listen. Now, musicians on Spotify have one silver bullet. They have one thing that they can hang their hat on, and they can say, the fact that I'm on Spotify and the fact that I make no money on my music is okay, because it gives me exposure, which then I can translate into selling tickets to a concert, right? That's the one trump card that a musician has. If you have a reasonable amount of success on Spotify, a reasonable amount of fans who follow you, then they might be willing to pay $30 for a ticket to come to a concert of yours, which you recoup a large percentage of that. Yeah, the venue gets something, whatever, your manager gets something. But at the end of the day, you're not making 2 cents per person showing.
Matt, can I jump in on a couple things?
Yeah.
I'm going to try to rewind about what you were saying. First of all, about the Steam thing. I think there is, you can also say that if people are starting to stop buying games at 60%, at like, $60 because they're going to wait for the sales or whatever, then that just enters us into the next phase of game theory, and then developers will shift their tactics so that they don't put these games on sale until later. I think that you can't just say that the buck stops at phase 2. It didn't stop at phase 1 if we assume that people are actually stopping buying games at $60. That's phase 1 was the Steam sale thing worked. Phase 2 is it starts to backfire. But phase 3 then is the compensation of the backfire, and you have these oscillations which continue forever. So I'm just not sold that we can say that this Steam sale system ultimately hurts things. I don't know. But I know that there's a reaction to the reaction as well.
That's fair. I think my point would be more that Steam is the Walmart of games, and that I don't think Walmart has responded to... I don't think companies that sell their products have responded to the downward pressure on pricing that Walmart has brought with increasing the quality of their products.
Yeah. So the other thing I wanted to say is this comparison, I think it's a very fair one, and I think it's actually, we can probably forecast things a little bit based on the way movies, TV, music has gone. There's indie stuff, indie musicians who have gone through the same thing, and we can kind of look at their story. And I don't even think that concerts is necessarily the compensation thing. I actually don't really know what it is, but there's definitely some indie people who don't even get concerts. I know people who make music and they try to get gigs here and there. It's like the indie soul. I mean, maybe these people are too indie and we're trying to think of something where people are making their living exclusively on music. If you're thinking about it from that perspective, I don't really know what Spotify has done. But I know that music has continued to be produced. Good music. Well, I mean, bad music too, of course. But music is not like Spotify has killed music. If anything, I think that it's brought more music out for people to... It's made music more available. The same kind of way that maybe Steam has made more indie games available. That, it's not that hard. I don't have to go to some weird Russian website to download this game. Oh no, it's just on Steam, a platform which I trust. Same way, and I don't have to buy the CD, I can just listen to the music on Spotify, whatever. I don't think that that's killed music, and maybe it's in its decline and I can't see it. But I don't think that a streaming service, in the same way, I don't think it would kill video games.
I don't know if it would kill it. I don't think my point is that it would kill it. I think my point is that you would see a narrowing of the genres that are fiscally sustainable. And I think what you would see is that a lot of games would start to look like Fortnite. And I think this is normal to a certain extent within gaming. Skyrim was a huge success, and now it feels like every game that gets developed is a open world game, right? Like there was this massive rush maybe it didn't start with Skyrim, but it certainly feels like every single player game anyway that's out there is like, we're going to be open world if it's not, a war game. And I think some of that might be in reaction to Skyrim. I don't know, but I think it's also developers chasing the market, right? Like this is where we can make successful, games. But I do think, like within streaming, you're right. You haven't seen music go away, but I do think part of that is there's a couple of things going on there. One of them is the fact that I think you do see a narrowing of the mainstream genres into like, is everything pop now? Certainly feels like it. Like hip hop, pop, they've all kind of merged. Country is...
I think that's rose-tinted glasses. People would say the same thing about like 90s music. That was all just pop.
Was it really though? Like Nirvana certainly wasn't pop.
But what I'm trying to say is I think that everybody who comes along... Sorry, John, I interrupted. Please speak.
We keep being like, hey, John, just shut up. Get out of here. But we really want you to talk.
I would have to say I kind of understand, Eric, where you're coming from, and I kind of agree. The way I kind of foresee it is like, let's take Imperator as an example, right? Imperator comes out, let's say they price it at $60. I know it came out at 40, but let's say they come out at 60, right? That would be a game that I was looking forward to. I was keeping up with the dev diaries and all that. Me personally, day one, I would buy that game in an instant, right? $60, hand it right over to Steam and Paradox, no problem. There's some other games that I'm like, I like to play it. Like War of Rights is a good example. I'm not going to pay the $30. However, when it goes on sale, $15, yeah, I like the game enough for $15. So like, I kind of agree with Eric's kind of vision of like, I don't think the price structure needs to change. I think it could stay the same. because it just goes based upon how much you want that game. So like you can bring it down for the Christmas sale, War of Rights down to probably like $5, and they'll see a boost of sales because some people are like, oh, $15. Yeah, I know it's on sale, but I mean it's a cool game. I don't want to put $15, but $5, yeah, $5 is cup of coffee, and I can play this game for like a half hour.
Oh, it's a cup of coffee. Oh, here we go.
Oh God, I think that's fair, but I also think my point is more of over. I think what you're reflecting is your current attitude today in time, and what I'm more commenting on is my observation based on how consumer attitudes have changed over time as Steam and sales have become an expected thing. And I don't begrudge sales. Like, I do think Steam has done a lot to sort of democratize gaming and bring in a lot more people into gaming that might, try different types of games out that they would never have tried out before. And overall, I think there are some positives. But I do wonder if we transition from a world where people buy games to a world where people no longer buy games, what does that do to game design? If all of a sudden a game developer is compensated by the fact that, okay, you make basically no money if someone buys your game and plays it for an hour, right? Because, well, first of all, people will stop buying games. That won't matter. So if you make a game that people are going to play, let's say We the Revolution, has a pretty long campaign in it, supposed to be around 20 hours. So if we are now in a streaming world where people have transitioned from buying games at $30 a pop to paying Steam $20 a month to play this game for an unlimited amount. And all I can do is I've got to get you to play 20 hours of this game, and I make 2 cents an hour. Or whatever, $1 an hour. As opposed to a game like EU4, which focuses on like, hey, dude, I'm going to suck your life away, and you're going to play 1,000 hours of this game. I guess what I'm trying to say is if we move from a world where people buy games to a world where people just play games and a developer gets a cut of how long they play them, what does that do to game design? Because how do you develop a tight narrative game? How do you develop a narrative game at all, right? The objective is not to tell a story. The objective of the game is to get you to play it as long as possible. So what does that do to game development? Is that good? Is it bad?
I don't see it. I don't see like a huge difference.
You don't think so?
I think there will be some changes, but it might be kind of like the Charles Dickens trick when his books are so long, supposedly because he was writing per page for a journal or whatever it was. He was submitting articles by the week, and he got paid per week, so he wanted to extend the writing. I think you might get a little bit of that, people teasing things out just to try to force you to play a little bit longer, but I don't know. I mean, then people are going to rate those games worse, so there's a feedback to that. I don't see it changing things too much. Maybe you will get some things, or people will try to, could be a good thing, people will try to include ways for you to spend more time in their game, which means that in some way, if you really like it, you have more opportunities to play it or tweak around with more things.
I think the crux of where my argument lies of why I think subscription-based services are bad is because the type of games that I think I enjoy will never be successful in a world where they can't rely on a small percentage of people to spend $20 on the game.
Can we look at, what's an example of that?
Will Rule the Waves ever have a large number of people playing this game, or even a moderate amount of people playing this game enough to where they can justify making the game?
Oh my god, good lord. If you're playing Rule the Waves, you're probably playing it for ungodly numbers of hours. I think Rule the Waves
20, so like, but here's the thing though, it was like 50 people, or like, that's unfair. 5,000 people playing this game for a lot of hours is still not going to make them very much money. I'm not convinced.
But it's not developed to me. It's a one developer project, and it's not even his job, his full-time job. It's a part-time project. So it's actually earning, it's probably not even about the money. I think the guy's doing it as a passion project. We had Frederick on, so I think we got that sense. I got that sense at least. So I would say that person those indie games probably shouldn't be compensated as much as the big AAA titles that have like 1,000 developers. I mean, that's way overkill. But let's say they have 50 people working on the project. Those should probably get more money. And they won't get more money per person.
Money. I just wonder if they will get enough to continue justify doing what they're doing. And I know you're saying they're doing it as a passion project, and I think you're right. But don't forget the fact that Naval Warfare Simulations, the publisher of Rule the Waves, basically said we have to implement DRM to even justify continuing the series, to make another game.
No. I'm okay, this is me spitballing, but I have a strong intuition that they wanted to take away piracy from a moral standpoint, not a business standpoint. I think that they're making money on this product. Rule the Waves 1 was so successful that they made Rule the Waves 2, and I'm just going out on a limb saying that probably Rule the Waves 2 is going to sell more than Rule the Waves 1, even though it's built on the original. A lot of the original development work for Rule the Waves 1 could be completely shared for Rule the Waves 2, so a lot less development probably had to go into it.
Probably could have been a DLC if we're honest.
So I would say that Rule the Waves 2 is going to be very, very successful for NWS, and I don't think it has anything to do with their DRM. In fact, I don't know I don't know how much the effect the DRM will have, but it will give them the satisfaction.
I do know that a friend who's covering it for a podcast is DMing me on Twitter, basically like, how the fuck do I get this game to work? I bought this like 20 hours ago and I still don't have my key, and I'm just thinking, oh god, this is the late 90s all over again.
Yeah, I don't think it does them any favors, but at the same time, that's their kind of like their moral right. They're kind of like just living by their business code, their code of ethics almost. They are so interested in preventing piracy that they're willing to kind of sacrifice some of the image of the game.
True, and let's be honest, Rule the Waves will never end up on this streaming service because they're not even on Steam today.
Yeah, that's right.
So they'll probably refuse to be on the streaming platform.
The one thing that I think Steam is kind of addressing. So one thing that I've been noticing and is that people will pay for in-app content, whether it be like extra clothes, different weapons. I think
until Europe sues you and says you can't do that.
But yeah, well, that's a whole different thing we would have to go into. But I think honestly, what you have to do is get the person sucked into the game. And what I mean by that is like a person's going to see, let's say, Civilization 6, right? And it's on the Steam front page. And they look at some of the screenshots. This looks interesting. Let me play the gameplay video, the trailer. Oh, that looks interesting. It's $60 though. Should I spend $60? What Steam is doing now, which is very interesting, they're allowing weekend gameplay. So they unlocked Rainbow Six, I think a couple weeks ago, where you could play it from Friday, I think, all the way to Monday. And you can play the game every level. And then at the end of Monday, right, the game, you can't play it anymore. But if you, after 3-4 days of playing the game, you're just like, wow, this is an incredible game. Wow, this is just insane. You'll be more inclined to buy the game, even at full price, and click on that. I think that the key thing is to get the players sucked in, right? You don't have to charge them in-app purchasing, but allow the player almost like a demo. Because demos were around since I think like the 80s and 90s, right? And I remember buying a lot of games based off the demo. I would play a demo for about an hour and then said, by the way, this is a demo. If you want to buy the full game, buy it here. And I immediately went there because, I played the game, I loved it, and I bought it. I feel like maybe that's what we're missing, the game demos.
I think demos went away for a reason.
Would you like to elaborate on that?
No. I'm going to guess demos went away for a reason because it didn't actually help drive sales.
I think that it might have been development time too. You don't want to spend development time on something.
But I think it's a Steam model. You don't have to actually make a game demo. You could just say, all right, by the way, this weekend or for the next 2 days, Anno 1800 is free to play. And I could actually do it.
But that only works for games that are of some sort of cultural awareness, right? Like, you're never going to see a demo on Steam. You're never going to see a Steam weekend pass, or whatever they're calling these things, for War in the Pacific. I mean, it's not on Steam, but you know what I mean. Like, the only games they pick for these things are pretty well-known developers. I've never seen anything from a game I've never heard of on there.
No, but what if they open it up? This could solve that problem where they say, all right, this weekend, this section of our catalog, 10,000 titles are free to play. Try them out. And then I guarantee you by Monday, they'll see a surge in sales because people will play whatever game out of those 10,000, love it, and say, you know what? I was kind of hesitant to buy this game, but I played it for 3 days. I love it. It's incredible. Here's $40. And I could see developers making more money off that.
Or consumers will say, you know what? That's not bad. I'll wait till it's free again.
No, I don't think that's going to happen, but they might wait for it to be on sale. They might be gauging what they're interested in is. I think it's a good gimmick because, one, if nothing else, it's advertising. If anybody else is even on your friends list playing it, you see that they're playing it. I mean, it's effective, I think. You get people to try it out for a weekend. I very much doubt that the people who are going to buy the game try it and then don't buy it. I think that it's more for people, it's usually done much after a release anyway, but it's probably more for people who are on the fence to suck them in. And they're usually accompanied by a sale as well, which gives you even this greater added pressure to buy it. So
yeah, that's a good point.
It's good psychological warfare. It's good marketing.
Okay. I mean, you're probably right. I think the thing that I'm mostly worried about, though, is I think if you see a streaming world evolve, I just worry about the overall commercial viability of the games that I enjoy playing. And you're right. Like, Rule the Waves, it's a passion project at the end of the day. Like, that's what it's made for. But I've seen games show up on Matrix that, like, I'll use Brother Against Brother. Civil War game. They focus on some small battles in the early Civil War. Clearly was a passion project. They're like, we're going to make more of these over time. Never have. I think part of it was probably financial. I don't know the details, but I think there was some disappointment there based on the level of success that they saw versus what they were hoping. And I worry that when you evolve to a world where you get paid by the hour of the number of, hours that someone plays, if you're in a streaming world, I just worry that that's going to shrink the overall types of games that are commercially viable, because the method of compensation changes dramatically. And I foresee that the type of games that I enjoy playing the most will be the most vulnerable. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm just, fear-mongering here. But it does worry me a bit when I think about War in the Pacific. Very small, very loyal base of fans. Hourly gaming, it could play them very well. But if the user base isn't big enough, a fraction of a cent a minute isn't going to pay out when you could just charge a game $90 to they obviously charge the game a much higher price for games like Command Modern Air Naval Operations or War in the Pacific or War in the East than the average computer game, because they know their market is smaller and they know that this is a very unique title and not a lot of people play it, but the people who do play it will value it tremendously. And so they charge a higher amount for the game. And what I worry about is, are you ever going to make $70 or $50 even off of someone playing your game a lot?
Basically, I wonder if is it so binary? Is it that if streaming exists, these games still can't sell from a non-streaming platform? Do you foresee it that, like, once Netflix comes, there's no such thing as cable television anymore?
Well, cable's dying, so that might be a bad example.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, though. Are you saying that basically once that streaming video games come along, there won't be any possibility to buy games from non-streaming services?
I don't know. I mean, I don't have the numbers, but I would argue that music has certainly seen that. With the rise of Spotify and iTunes Music, there really isn't a market for people buying music anymore. Some people do, but it's a very small number. And I think you're seeing, Apple aren't they getting rid of iTunes and it's just going to be like apps and then it's going to be like music as its own app or whatever? But, I think...
No, I mean, they're kind of like dividing up iTunes into 3 apps. So, like, the iTunes store is still going to be there. It's just they're pulling the music side out of iTunes into its own app, and then the video part into its own app, and then the podcast part into its own app. It's basically just taking iTunes and putting into 3 separate apps.
Right, but if you go into Apple Music, you don't even see an option really to buy music anymore.
The iTunes store will still be in there. You just got to click it and you can buy music there. It's just separating the stores. It's basically separating the content. So music.
Sure, but my point is when I go into my Apple Music, I do not see anything that suggests buying it.
Oh, you mean through the iTunes app? I'm sorry, for the iPhone Apple Music icon. Yeah, that one and the Mac one are going to be, I believe, a little bit different.
Yeah, so I mean, we'll see. But I think what I'm trying to say is music, I think there is no market for buying music anymore. Or it's a very small market of people who do it. Movies are maybe a little bit different, and I think the gaming market will depend on how things are adopted. If it stays to be this Microsoft model where games rotate in and out of the catalog, then I think you could see an opportunity to continue buying games because the catalog is limited, only certain games are free, and then after a while, like the game leaves your platform, and if you want to keep playing it, you got to buy it, right? So that would still leave a market to purchase games. If it's the Spotify Apple Music model, then I think you're screwed. So I think it depends on how things develop, and I guess we'll see how they develop. But yeah, it could go either way.
That was a great discussion. One question I got for you guys: what are you drinking, Matt?
I'm waiting for Tortuga. Where did Tortuga go?
Oh, I was not going to talk first. I put my foot down. There. I'm a little embarrassed, actually. I'm literally having milk again.
Tortuga, the milk drinker.
Leave me alone. Matt, tell me, is it Tortuga or is it Eric? I'm so confused.
Eric, there's this thing out there about like milk and
does the body good?
Oh, internet thing with like white supremacists.
Oh, I never heard of that.
Oh, really?
Supposedly they drink like milk as like a white supremacist thing.
Are you serious?
Like they drink it because it's pure or white or something. I don't know. I've seen some tweets about it and it's ridiculous.
Oh, that won't work with me. I'm not drinking chocolate milk, but I prefer chocolate milk if I could get my hands on it.
Oh, damn right. Chocolate milk is the best, man.
If I go grocery shopping, I reward myself by buying a little pint-sized chocolate milk.
Nestle?
Normally it's just like the Kroger generic brand. I mean, even when I splurge, I'm cheap.
Yoo-hoo.
Yeah. Tortuga, Jean, what are you drinking?
I was drinking, tonight I'm just having black coffee. I am recovering from yesterday because I did have a few too many beers. So I'm kind of like in the recovery phase today. So yeah, got a little carried away. Have friends visiting. So
well, it's a fair question then. Fair question here. So for both of you, 4th of July just happened. Did you celebrate with anything in particular?
No, but I know you did.
Stop bringing this back to me. It's gonna make me sound like the alcoholic in the group.
Well, you have this. I saw your bottle of scotch, and I was like, man. How long is it going to take me to fly to your house?
That would be a dumb thing to do. Tortuga, what did you have over 4th of July? Anything?
I mean, are you talking about alcohol? A Corona?
Oh my God, you got
nothing too much.
What the fuck?
I did not join the Single Malt Strategy podcast for my single maltedness.
I mean, you're clearly single malt milk. That's malted milk balls.
I like that. Single malt milk.
It's a chocolate milk.
All right.
Podcast.
So I purchased, and this was for the 4th of July, I purchased a single malt scotch. It is a Balvenie scotch, so that's the distillery. And it is a 14-year-old peat weak scotch. So it is, Balvenie is usually not super peaty. Usually scotches that are known for being really peaty are like Lagavulin or Laphroaig. So like when you open up a bottle of Laphroaig or you open up a bottle of Lagavulin, you can almost like smell like a campfire type smell because they're very peaty. They're very sort of flavorful in their scotch. Balvenie usually isn't. They're typically a little bit sweeter. A lot of their more well-known scotches are like Caribbean casks or what have you, but they're probably more in vein with like something like Macallan where they're not super peaty. They're not overly refined like something like a blend like Johnny Walker where it's kind of inoffensive but not all that tasty. But this is a really interesting one. It is a 2003 vintage according to this bottle. Oh boy. And it is just it's a different take on Balvenie because it is definitely very peaty and it's interesting. Trying to see, I'm not very good with like actually tasting flavors and stuff. But according to this bottle,
does it have a hint of milk?
I mean, let's see. It is a gentle, sweet peat smoke on the nose with some lighter floral notes and delicate butterscotch honey.
Ooh.
Velvety and round to taste with peat smoke balancing citrus flavors, oaky vanilla, and blossom honey. The
Whoa.
finish has gentle smoke with a lingering and creamy vanilla sweetness.
Wow.
It's from the bottle. So
That sounds
I
delicious.
think it tastes pretty interesting. It was on a really good sale, and I got it for the 4th of July. It is still like 90% full, so if we record another episode anytime soon, I probably won't have any. But I just figured, hey, pick it up for the 4th of July. Celebrated up in Wisconsin with some family and friends. Still have most of the bottle left over, and we're having some people over later this week, so probably enjoy it for that. But it was a really enjoyable scotch, and I think, it is very peaty, but I would say it's not like overwhelming, and I do think that sort of the hints of vanilla and other thing do come through, a little bit of sweetness from the honey, because I've had Lafroig, I've had Lagavulin, and at times, especially Lafroig, they can be a little bit overpowering with just like, this is too smoky, this is too peaty, and I think the Balvenie 14-year-old Peat Week strikes a nice balance there, and it's a good scotch for a pretty affordable price.
See, the problem that I have is like when I see the price tag of like even a $60 bottle of scotch, I'm like, buy this bottle of scotch. It's gonna be delicious. Or I could buy $10 and get my favorite beer. And I always go with the $10 because it's a cheaper option. But I have no problem going to the bar and I say, you know what? I want really good scotch. So I'll get a really good scotch and it'll be like $20 per glass. And I'm like, yeah, that was a really good glass. I'll sneak for one more. And then I'll get another and another. And before I know it, the bill's $100. And I'm like, shit, I should have just got the bottle.
Yeah. I mean, never buy a scotch at a bar. That would be my lesson. They charge so goddamn much.
Yes, they do. $100 bill.
I'm not actually drinking the scotch right now. I'm just sipping a beer right now, which is Totally Naked. That's the name of the beer. I'm not totally naked myself right now.
Thanks for that visual.
It's by New Glarus Brewing in Wisconsin.
Nude Glaulis?
New Glarus.
Oh, okay, I thought you said nude Glaulis.
It's actually New Glarus is on more taps in Wisconsin than any other beer, even any of the macro beers.
Oh wow!
And it's basically they're known as being their most popular beer is called Spotted Cow, which I've talked about on the show before. But they're pretty good.
I've heard of Spotted Cow. Yeah.
So Totally Naked is their seasonal summer, but it's not very summery. It's kind of more of a.
It's peaty.
No, it's definitely not peaty.
All right, I guess that does it for this episode.
And we're out. Bye-bye.